How many discounts does USAA Auto Insurance offer? Too many to say here. Multi-vehicle discount, safe driver discount, new vehicle discount, storage discount, legacy.
How many discounts will you stack up? Visit USAA.com/auto discounts. Restrictions apply.
Whatever the occasion, effortless elegance is right this way. Because Hilton brings you new ways to stay courtesy of the Nomad London. And it doesn't stop at award-winning dining in a space draped in velvet and illuminated by vintage chandeliers. No, this day goes beyond with unparalleled personalized service and attentive hospitality. Oh, and did we mention the Nomad London can be booked using your Hilton Honors points at Hilton.com? Hilton, for the stay.
The new McCrispy Strip is here. Dip approved by ketchup, tangy barbecue, honey mustard, Sprite, McFlurry, Big Mac sauce, double dipped in buffalo and ranch, more ranch, and creamy chili McCrispy Strip Dip. Now at McDonald's. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
Good evening and welcome to Backlisted, the podcast. So professional. Good evening and welcome to Backlisted, the podcast that gives new life to old books. Tonight, you find us in Foyles in London, one of London's oldest and most prestigious bookshops on the Charing Cross Road, famous as perhaps the great book-selling street, not only in London but in the world. We're here at the first of our, what we hope will be monthly gigs at Foyles, and delighted to be here with a live audience. Andy, Foyles, does it have a special place in your heart?
Foyles always has a special place in my heart, both now in its streamlined modern incarnation, but also in the old days. Who tried to buy a book here in the 1980s? Yes, most of the audience. Wasn't it a challenge?
It was actually easier to steal a book than to buy one. You had to go to 2 tills, do you remember? Anyone remember the way that they organised fiction? By publisher. Yep. It sort of worked if you were a publisher. It didn't work if you were trying to find Zardoz by
Zardoz, published by New English Library. I think it was a healthy middle finger to the consumer, which we could see. But it's very nice to be here in London's glittering West End with a lovely audience full of people. Thank you so much for coming. And we're going to be talking about a novel called The Good Soldier by Ford Madox Ford. How many people here in this audience have read The Good Soldier by Ford Madox Ford? None of you. Wow, that's so surprising.
That is sad.
That
Possibly
is sad.
the saddest story
the saddest story ever told. Well, it's really good, as you'll hear. For those of you who haven't read it, which is all of you, definitely, this podcast is crammed with spoilers. It's nothing but spoilers. It's spoiler heavy. Because this novel is impossible to talk about without delving into the plot and the motivations of the characters in it. So, if you're listening at home, and you haven't yet read it, you might want to read the novel before you listen to the show. If you're here in the room, please don't go, but just cover your ears or something while we're talking. And we are very lucky to have joining us here our dear friend, Alex Michaelides.
Hello. Hi. It's so weird to be here. I spot a spare seat at the front that I feel I should go and sit in because I'm so used to listening to this podcast, not being part of it. And I know your voices so well, and I know I speak for everybody here tonight when I say what an amazing thing you guys have done. And I've discovered so many truly fantastic books through the two of you. And you've kept me company through many lonely evenings. Which
audience members could do more than just nod because they can't. Because Because they can't hear that you're nodding at home, can they? God almighty. Right, thank you, Alex. Thank you so much, Alex. That's very kind. That's very kind. What was it you said back there a moment ago? You said...
I said, don't call me a master storyteller.
Alex Michaelides is a master storyteller. He was born and raised in Cyprus. He grew up with the love of old Hollywood movies and dreamed of working in LA as a writer. After studying English at Cambridge University, he put his plan into action and embarked on a disastrous screenwriting career. Is that true?
Yeah, fair enough.
How
yeah.
many unsuccessful screenplays did you get away?
Well, yeah, many unsuccessful screenplays and 3 films which got worse and worse.
Were you surprised
that they got worse? I was kind of sad about it, but
yes. Crestfallen.
But then I began to suspect that I was in the wrong job.
Did you feel you honed your craft while you were learning how not to write screenplays, and then you were able to... Actually, novels were easy.
Yes, I do. I just think it's a different skill set.
Yeah.
And it was always never working until I tried to write something from a first person point of view as a character. And then I went, oh, this is a lot easier,
Yes. You decided to try and write a detective story inspired by a lifelong passion for golden age detective fiction, Agatha Christie in particular, which is lucky because in 2 months' time we will be back here at Foyles in the middle of July. Which we're very much looking forward to.
Wow, I'll be here for that.
Alex's first novel, The Silent Patient, was a New York Times and Sunday Times bestseller, as were his 2 subsequent books. He continues to derive pleasure and inspiration from writers such as Agatha Christie, Ruth Rendell, Patricia Highsmith, and Ford Madox Ford. The Good Soldier, which we are talking about this evening, inspired his latest novel, The Fury, which he is currently adapting for the screen. Alex, you said just now that the first-person narrator gave you freedom to do things that you felt you couldn't do in a screenplay. Is that true of The Fury, and is that something you got from The Good Soldier?
Yes, I think one of the most striking things about The Good Soldier is that first-person narration, and it's certainly what I really fell in love with. It's the conversational tone and this device he has of talking to you. And so I borrowed it, for want of a better word, for The Fury. And I took the idea that the narrator is talking to somebody in a bar and telling them a story. And so it was just this whole kind of device of holding a novel, I think, is so incredible.
We should say. It was published in 1915. Simultaneously in New York and London by John Lane.
Well, we should say immediately, this won't be a comprehensive overview of the career of Ford Madox Ford, because he wrote 81 books.
He did.
And we only have a fortnight in which to prepare one of these things. So we will be focusing mostly on... And indeed, The Good Soldier was one of 5 books that Ford Madox Ford published in 1915 alone.
Yeah. He always said it was his favourite book, though. He always thought it was his best book. And it's an opinion shared by many people, as we will discuss in the podcast in general. But why don't we have the blurb?
So I'm reading the blurb off the back of a Penguin Modern Classics edition from the early 1970s. Ford Madox Ford, The Good Soldier, A Tale of Passion. Ford Madox Ford has been among the neglected writers of the first quarter of this century. His tragic novel, The Good Soldier, in which he portrays in the stoical but fallible figure of Edward Ashburnham, an example of the English landed gentry at its best, was written just before the First World War, open brackets. It is a curious detail that the 4th of August, the date of the outbreak of war, is made a date of recurring significance in the characters' lives, close brackets. This unembittered story...
What?
Says the crowd.
Ripple through the crowd.
This unembittered story of deceit and hatred was readily termed, quote, great, a piece of art and therefore an enlightenment, and beautiful and moving by contemporary reviewers. A more modern estimate of its worth is expressed by Walter Allen in Tradition and Dream. That's what you could do on the back of a blurb then, right?
Good old Walter Allen, the English novel.
Ford's finest novel is probably The Good Soldier, as formally perfect a novel as any in English, and an amazingly subtle account by one of them of the lives of 4 people who appear to live in harmony and friendship. The cover, designed by Germano Facchetti, shows a detail from a hotel room by John Singer Sargent. There you go. I think that is a sort of moderately bad blurb. It's appalling, says that lady there. Boring. Yeah. Have you read the novel? Yeah, you wouldn't say that, would you? No. Me neither.
It's missing the word funny, don't you think? Because I find it hilarious, the book.
Do you?
Yeah.
Do you?
Okay, why am I nervous? I mean, it's interesting reading Julian Barnes' piece about it, which is so incredible. And,
It's his favourite novel.
It is. And he says, a rushing, contradictory, time-jumping, place-jumping stream of lostness, bafflement, ignorance, and horror, to which I would add humour as well. No? Andy, you're looking at me like you don't agree at all.
No, no. First of all, I did find it funny, but I wouldn't open with funny on this book. This is Woodhouse. This ain't. So that was why I was looking. That's why I was looking surprised. Please tell us, Alex, where you were, who you were, what you were doing when you first read The Good Soldier by Ford Madox Ford.
I was in Cyprus and I was about 16, and a cousin was studying English at Bristol University, and they studied it, and she brought it back one summer and gave it to me. And she said, I think you'll get a kick out of this. And I did. I think the first time I read it, I really took him at face value. And I think I've read it countless times over the years since then. And each time, I think I believe him less.
Yeah. Yeah. Who is he? John Dowell.
John Dowell.
So our narrator is John. He's often described as the king of unreliable narrators. But unreliable isn't quite right, is it?
I don't think so. I think what he is kind of narcissistic, and he tells the same story slightly differently every time. So whether that makes you unreliable, I think that's a kind of that just doesn't quite capture the weirdness of his relationship with the story that he's telling, which keeps unfolding. New doors are opened, new windows are opened every time he tells it. It's not that I think he's trying to deceive. I don't think he is trying to deceive you. No, I think he's just making up as he goes along each time.
I think he is an unreliable narrator, but I think there's a lot of. I disagree with John respectfully, dear colleague. There's misdirection going on.
Misdirection's good,
from the very opening line, which this is my last quote to Julian Barnes for the evening. He says, "The first sentence is one of the most misleading in all fiction."
Why don't you read us the opening of the book, and then let's discuss that opening sentence, please?
Sure.
So, for those of you who haven't read The Good Soldier, you have now started reading The Good Soldier. That's the favour we do you all.
Forgive my mispronunciations. Okay. This is the saddest story I have ever heard. We had known the Ashburnhams for 9 seasons of the town of Nauheim with an extreme intimacy, or rather with an acquaintanceship, as loose and easy and yet as close as a good gloves with your hand. My wife and I knew Captain and Mrs. Ashburnham as well as it was possible to know anybody, and yet, in another sense, we knew nothing about them. This is, I believe, a state of things only possible with English people, of whom, till today, when I sit down to puzzle out what I know of this sad affair, I knew nothing whatsoever. 6 months ago, I had never been to England, and certainly I never sounded the depths of an English heart. I had known the shallows.
A little round of applause, please.
Yes.
So one of the things that Barnes says, which I will echo, is how that lands on your ear the first time you hear it or read it is radically different by the time you've finished reading this novel for the first time, and then again every time thereafter. And specifically, that opening line, that very famous opening line, this is the saddest story I have ever heard. Alex, what's the tell word in that sentence?
I'd say heard,
yeah.
Really.
Why? Yes.
So
why
odd.
heard?
Yeah.
Why would the narrator of this novel say he has heard the story unless he were telling it to himself as though he were alienated from his own complicity in the events, right?
Yes.
It's very, very odd. And yet at the same time, Alex, here's a fact about The Good Soldier by Ford Madox Ford. It was not written, it was dictated.
Oh, wow, like Henry James.
Yes.
I didn't know that.
So Ford Madox Ford
Really?
dictated it in the space of about 2 months, striding up and down his office to his typist. So he may well have begun it spontaneously. This is the saddest story I have ever heard. Or he didn't, or it's utterly deliberate.
Wow, that conversational tone suddenly makes sense because it's so I mean, it does sound like he's talking. And he was.
A fireside story, isn't it? That's the frame he puts on it later on in the book, that he's just talking to somebody. He can't figure out what the best way of telling this story is. But it is still, every time I go back to it, that herd really sticks in your mind. What are you having, some sort of weird out-of-body experience? I suppose if that's what you mean by unreliable, that I just think it's more sinister than unreliable is what I mean.
So Alex read it. You read it when you were, say, 16, did you say?
Yeah.
John, when did you first read The Good Soldier?
I read it when I was a bookseller in the 1980s.
Do you remember if you stole a copy from Foyles?
Probably stole a copy from Waterstones.
Yeah.
Penguin Classics edition, I remember, and completely blew me away when I read it. And I realised, though, when this was announced, how little I remember. It's astonishing how little I remembered. I mean, if you'd asked me what it was about, I would have said, "What is it about?" Yeah, what is it about? I'd have said, it's like about a soldier, good soldier. No, I'd have said it was about a really nasty love affair that's gone horribly wrong, adultery.
It's about a love square, isn't it?
Love square, yeah, a foursome, a quartet.
I read it in the 1980s. I suppose I must have been about 20, principally as a result of it being Graham Greene's, if not his favourite novel, one of his favourite novels. And I was saying to these two earlier that one of the things I found really, really interesting going back to it for this episode of Backlisted is I recall that when I read it in the 1980s, it was often talked of in the same breath as The Great Gatsby. And you can kind of see that. It's the narrator reflecting
Nick Carraway,
on relationships that he has involvement with, but perhaps not complete understanding of. Coming back to it in the year 2024, it's no longer talked of in the same breath as The Great Gatsby, but in the same breath as Patricia Highsmith's Ripley novels. Because there seems to have been an evolution in thinking about the unreliability of John Dowell, the narrator, who may not be so much unreliable as fatal.
Yeah.
How many people who read the novel read it and felt John Dowell was responsible for the string of deaths and suicides that occur in the novel?
Certain number of people putting their hands up.
2 of you. Go back and read it again, everyone else.
I was going to say, that makes 4 of us.
Yeah. I think he is. I think John Dowell is a murderer.
That's 5, yeah.
5.
I think that's the thing about him, is that he's manipulative. He's manipulative and he is delusional, and I think his story has got holes in it all over the place, and he's continually he sets it up as a fireside chat, but in fact it's like a confession. It's like he's talking to a police officer, trying to remember what he said the last time around.
Which is great because it makes me think of Double Indemnity or something like that. It's got that same sort of feel to it.
It's really noir book.
It is. I mean, what I love about it so much is the way that the humour always kind of turns nasty. So I think one of my favourite sections is when he's describing Florence, his wife's elaborate machinations to make sure she doesn't have sex with him, which involve, faking a heart condition, locking a door, locking several doors, and the little contrivance that she has, the bell that she can ring in case she needs, rescuing, the fact that she supplies him with an axe in case she has a heart attack, and the little vial of prussic acid which she carries around with him. And you think, when you're reading it, you're laughing, thinking, oh, well, he must be so repulsive if she's going to all of these lengths to make sure she doesn't have to sleep with him. And then you find out, he kind of throws away at the end of one chapter, that Florence suspected that I would kill her if I found out she wasn't a virgin. And suddenly you understand why she's going to all of these elaborate lengths to keep him away from her. And then the moment he does find out that she had been sleeping with Jimmy, in the very next scene, she's found arranged on a bed with an empty vial of...
Look at that man nodding to her furiously there.
Yeah, and you can't help, as a crime writer, my alarm bells go off straight away.
Alex, prussic acid, not noted for its kind of, it's not like taking... I mean, that's a nasty way to die, right?
Yeah, you would be convulsing and throwing up and all kinds of things. You wouldn't be lying on the back still holding...
I'm afraid, Mr. Dowell, your story doesn't hold much water. I'm going to take you back.
Alex, you mentioned Jimmy. I want to play a clip now from the 1981 TV adaptation, starring Jeremy Brett, and I'm going to ask the audience members if they can recognise here the voice of Jimmy, the American voice you're going to hear. Which actor is this? What is he most famous for? I will be throwing this out to the audience. Let's hear the clip.
I'm sorry, what's that, Jimmy?
I said that the Hurlbird family heart sure needs careful handling.
Oh, yes. Yes, of course. You can't do better than Nauheim, though. I'm an expert. I know. When I went around the world with Florence and her Uncle John, we reckoned that there was no place better than Nauheim for the Hurlbird heart. Right. My trouble with the old man was keeping him off politics. He was a Democrat, you know. Liked to argue politics with every American he met. Not good for the heart. And the trouble I had steering him away from other Americans. Florence isn't interested in politics.
I thought Florence was never out of my sight. In fact, she was hardly ever in it.
Okay, audience members, please raise your hand if you think you would like to hazard a guess at which actor is playing Jimmy in that clip from 1981. Yes, madam, in front row.
You know John Ratzenberger from Friends.
It is John Ratzenberger, the voice of Cliff Claiborne from Cheers, and Mr. Potato Head from the Toy Story films, in a young role. That's very good, that adaptation starring Jeremy Brett,
Is it?
in my opinion. But Alex, you watched it and you found it a bit of a struggle.
I did, yeah. I think again, it's a bit like adapting Murder of Roger Ackroyd. I think the so much of it is there is a voiceover, but the narration is everything in this book.
Yes, I quite agree. I'm going to read the beginning of chapter 2, which is one of the things John was just talking about. Just the first couple of paragraphs, and I want you to think while I read this, okay, here's this guy, he's telling us this story. What are the hints that we might not trust him? I don't know how it is best to put this thing down. Whether it would be better to try and tell the story from the beginning, as if it were a story, or whether to tell it from this distance of time, as it reached me from the lips of Leonora and from those of Edward himself. So I shall just imagine myself, for a fortnight or so, at one side of the fireplace of a country cottage, with a sympathetic soul opposite me. And I shall go on talking, in a low voice, while the sea sounds in the distance, and overhead the great black flood of wind polishes the bright stars. From time to time we shall get up and go to the door and look out at the great moon and say, "Why, it is nearly as bright as in Provence." And then we shall come back to the fireside with just the touch of a sigh, because we are not in that Provence where even the saddest stories are gay. Consider the lamentable history of Père Vidal. 2 years ago, Florence and I motored from Biarritz to Las Tours, which is in the Black Mountains. In the middle of a tortuous valley, there rises up an immense pinnacle, and on the pinnacle are 4 castles, Las Tours, the towers. And the immense mistral blew down that valley, which was the way from France into Provence, so that the silver-grey olive leaves appeared like hair flying in the wind, and the tufts of rosemary crept into the iron rocks that they might not be torn up by the roots. You can always count on a murderer for a fancy prose style. Oh, sorry, that was... I don't know how that got in there. But yeah, Alex, I see what you mean about the as soon as you start to doubt the voice, what are you reading? Are you reading poetry or are you reading guff, right? To try and seem reasonable and seem personable and seem like you're sitting by the fireside.
What I noticed particularly on this reread was how often he contradicts himself, like constantly, chapter by chapter. I never think about Florence ever. And then the next chapter is I spent hours obsessing about how much I hate her. And then it just changes the whole time.
Yeah. John, why do you think this novel, beyond it being a great novel, why does it seem to yield different meanings on different readings?
I think that's kind of the key to why it has lasted. I mean, it's interesting. It says that it was little regarded in the first half of and it's true that it wasn't a massive bestseller, I think, but it doesn't go away because of the control of that voice that Ford has. And, whether it's interesting or not interesting to say that he was very self-consciously trying to write a kind of version of de Maupassant, wanted to write a French novel. He was influenced by Henry James. He'd worked with Conrad. There's a modern quality to the control of the voice. You read it, and then you, as Alex has just said, you think, okay, I see what's going on here. And then he completely pulls, the next chapter, he'll completely pull the rug from under your feet. So just in terms of and I was going to ask you this question, you famously are not a man who particularly loves plot, but there is a massive amount of plot in this novel. I mean, a huge amount. I mean, it's up there with Chandler, for lots of kind of things happening and things maybe not quite happening and being able for the reader to be able to work them out at first. And yet it doesn't read like a thriller in that way. There's some quality of that voice that Ford imbues the character of Dowell with. You finish the book, you want to go back again and read it again. There aren't very many books, honestly, that I feel like that. But this is such a bravura technical performance. And I know it's always a bit of a cop-out when people say that. But what I think is what are you trying to do with a novel? I think he says it somewhere in the book, doesn't he, about, let me see if I can find it. It's a great little piece where he says something about what makes it's a good novel, not a bad novel. The fellow talked like a cheap novelist, or like a very good novelist for the matter of that, if it's the business of a novelist to make you see things clearly. Yeah, might be the business if. And I tell you, I see things as clearly as if it were a dream that never left me.
That's very Chandler, isn't it?
When I read my bit, I'm going to do a really bad American accent because I don't. Does anyone think that John Dowell is American in this book? Do you get that? Is that what rushes off at you when you read that prose?
He's not even American, everyone. He's not even what he says he is.
No.
Hey, you asked me about Chandler. What are you a crime writer, Alex? What are your feelings about Chandler? Are you a Chandler fan?
Yeah, definitely. Particularly the writing style, which I've never really thought of comparing, Ford Madox Ford to him before. But there's something there, isn't there?
I think the writing style with Chandler, for me, John asked about the plot, right? There's a lot of plot in The Good Soldier. I love Chandler, and the reason I love Chandler is that he actually has contempt for plot.
Yes.
That's the fun of it. Plot is an excuse for style, as it is for all good writers. And Ford Madox Ford, I would argue, is giving you a story that, if we look at the plot, is absurdly melodramatic. It's one supposed suicide or death or confrontation in a spa town after another. It doesn't really hold water as a plot. It's absurd. What makes it a masterpiece is how the plot is handled in the voice of that particular bumbling, pseudo-idiotic narrator. That, for me, is where the alchemy occurs in The Good Soldier.
Which is why, I think Ruth Rendell said that it was the best constructed novel in the English language. Because when I read it, you see, because I probably read it in a different way to you, I read it to try and copy it. And so I'm looking really closely to see what I can learn and what I can steal, for want of a better word. And it's the way that he does construct it, because why does he initially present this kind of one perspective of how they all interact, and then he goes back, and then he goes back, and then he goes back, and so it's the constant layers being added again, and none of the layers really match.
And he gets
sorry, let me ask you, Alex. Then, when you are constructing a novel, and you are flirting with the idea of an unreliable narrator, is the appeal, as we say, misdirection? Do you allow your narrators to contradict themselves in order to wrong foot the reader?
It's a hard question to answer. No, I haven't, but having really got into the idea on this last reread, I think I might try it next time. I really think what we keep dancing around is something you said earlier, which is the key to it for me is very much is this intentionally misleading?
Yes.
Or is it accidental? And if it's intentional, it's a masterpiece. And if it's accidental, it's possibly less so. Personally, I think it is intentional. I think that everything that he says about the contradictions, the murders, the lack of explanations, the way that his feelings are either, love or hate for the same person and never really match up. I think you're meant to start doubting him. And even I read some contemporary reviews where they said you don't believe he's American, and they use that as a criticism. But what if it's not a criticism? What if he's lying about his background as this character as well? Yeah.
I mean, there's in this edition there's an essay about impressionism, which was one of the things that he said he was doing with the novel, literary impressionism. And the style of that essay is almost indistinguishable from John Dowell's style.
Right.
So there is this sort of strange. Is it Ford? Is it Ford or is it Dowell? And does it matter? I mean, to me, it doesn't matter. I mean, what you said before, I think is absolutely the key. It's a brilliant thing to have a book that's so full of plot where you don't care about what happens because you know what happens. He tells you what happens really early in the book.
But you can never really make sense of what happens either.
And then
I've read it so many times, and every time I read it, it's like a different book because there's so much plot to keep hold of, and you can't keep hold of any of it.
Yeah.
John, you mentioned how indistinguishable the style of one of Ford Madox Ford's essays is from the style of Arthur Dowell recounting his story to you in front of the fire. It seems like a good moment to take a break. But when we come back, I'm going to give you a little potted biography of Ford Madox Ford because I think the unknowability of Ford Madox Ford, bizarrely, will illuminate the unknowability of the narrator of The Good Soldier. So we'll see you in a minute.
Finding a new job is stressful. But with Indeed, it doesn't have to be. Just fill out your Indeed profile with your skills, experience, and desired salary. The more you fill out, the better your matches will be. And hearing from hiring managers will be 2 times more likely. Relax. That's your Indeed profile sending opportunities your way. Indeed, the world can work better.
Switch to Verizon Business and get more from your internet without paying more for your internet. Get LTE Business Internet starting at $39 a month when paired with select business mobile plans. That's unlimited data, and with it, unlimited possibilities. Start saving today with Verizon Business, ranked #1 in small business internet customer satisfaction by J.D. Power. Starting price for 25 megabits per second LTE internet plan with smartphone plan savings, plus taxes, fees, and economic adjustment charge. Terms apply. For J.D. Power 2024 award information, visit jdpower.com/awards.
And we're back. Now, normally I would offer you a potted biography of Ford Madox Ford that I had researched myself. But on this occasion, I was browsing through the stacks at the London Library, and I found a wonderful review of a biography called The Saddest Story, a biography of Ford Madox Ford by Arthur Meisner, written by Paul Scott. I don't know how many of you remember Paul Scott, the author of the Raj Quartet. And so I'm going to read some of this review because it's so good on helping us understand the enigma of Ford Madox Ford.
Wasn't even called Ford Madox Ford.
He wasn't even called Ford Madox Ford. The review is called The Many Faces of Fordie. Taking on Fordie is an act rash enough in itself to compel our admiration for the biographer who sets about the apparently hopeless task of trying to pin him down. Arrange him neatly in one pigeonhole marked man, 40, rather mad about good letters, and he pops out of another disguised as an English country gentleman doing the rounds of his estates and chatting to his tenants. Then, just as you recollect that there were no estates, he vanishes, to turn up again as an Edwardian man about town or a bohemian in Paris, hobnobbing with Gertrude Stein and young Hemingway. The pace quickens. Fordie flashes from one persona to another. Poet, hack journalist, illustrious editor, ghostwriter, eminent novelist, social lion, preposterous bore, respectable family man, aging lecher. You could say he was all of these things, or that only 3 things about him are clear. That he was devoted to books, not only his own, but other people's, a rare grace, fatally attractive to and unfaithful to women, and that he bumbled through life with an unimpaired but ill-defined sense of what was due to him. And it is, of course, the origin of that sense that gives the biographer so much trouble. That, and the fact that Fordie was a charming liar, concerned not much with the facts so much as with his impressions of them, a sign, possibly, of immaturity. Wow, indeed. Now, that unreliable author is the creator of that unreliable narrator, who seem to have quite a lot in common, don't they?
Yeah.
Now, that might be Paul Scott's gloss on it. But
So what does that make you think?
it makes me think that if Dowell is some kind of a self-portrait, or if Dowell is a representation of how Ford Madox Ford approached, quote unquote, the truth, you have actually rather a kaleidoscopic and accurate artistic sensibility being represented.
I love that.
You know, we can see Dowell in the role of a writer. All good, but what are all good books? They're books about books. And The Good Soldier is a book about books. You could read Dowell as not just the narrator of this book, but the writer, the person who chooses which emphasis to put on supposedly solid events. There are no solid events. It's all subjective. Now, we might extend from that and say, okay, and he's a murderer. He doesn't have to be a murderer, Alex. This is the thing we were talking about, right? Is the book a masterpiece if he isn't a murderer?
Look, what about if we you think about Turn of the Screw in relation to this for a second? Because, I've been peddling this idea that he's the first unreliable narrator in fiction for a while. And my old director of studies came to an event that I did in Cambridge, and he took me aside and he said, "You are wrong. This is not the first unreliable narration. In fact, the Bible is the first."
Homer.
And then he suggested the governess in Turn of the Screw. But I would say that she's just mad, right? She's not doing it on purpose. And that's the difference between Dowell and her.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think it's really interesting as well, is the intentionality is important. I once tried to pretend to my tutor that T.S. Eliot was writing some bad poetry in the four quartets because he was trying to make a point. And my tutor just looked at me and said, "I think we all know that he wasn't that kind of poet." So, all right, let's just try it on. But I think the more you think about Dowell and you think about Ford, the more this does seem to be like, I'm not sure whether he was entirely in control of it, Ford, though. I don't know that.
So what's your, John, you were sharing your theory about Dowell in The Good Soldier. What's your theory?
I think he's in love. I think Dowell's in love with Ashburnham. I think there's a kind of definite sense that that you said, which I'd like to share with the room, is you said that Edward Ashburnham is the only good character in the novel.
Yes, it's my contention that the reason why The Good Soldier is called The Good Soldier is there are at least three characters who that might refer to within the novel. That's the first thing. And the second thing is Edward Ashburnham, for all his adulterous behaviour, is the only character in the novel with any kind of integrity. Dowell doesn't have any. The two women don't really have any. So what do we mean by the good soldier? Is the good soldier a soldier who is good, like Ashburnham? Or is a good soldier a soldier who follows orders? Or is a good soldier a sniper who takes out one victim after another? I don't know.
Isn't Nancy good?
Innocent, not good.
Okay.
He does describe her as monstrous at one point when she's in the bedroom with him.
Yeah.
I would love to hear what you guys think about the title. Can I read a tiny letter thing?
Please go ahead, yeah.
So, I think it's quite famous, the fact that this was not the original title. The original title was The Saddest Story, yeah?
Yeah, and it was serialised in Blast, Wyndham Lewis's magazine, the first few in 1914, and under the title, The Saddest Story.
Which I think is a great title.
Yeah.
And I'm not alone in that, because he writes to his publisher in 1914, "My dear Lane, I should have thought that you publishers had had eye-openers enough about monkeying about with authors' titles at the request of travellers. The saddest story, I say it in all humility, is about the best book you ever published, and the title is about the best title. Still, I make it a principle never to interfere with my publisher, but to take it out in calling him names. Why not call the book The Roaring Joke? Call it anything you like.
Brilliant.
Or perhaps it would be better to call it A Good Soldier. That might do. At any rate, it is all I can think of. Yours."
Isn't that brilliant? So travellers are sales reps, right?
Yeah.
Is that what he's talking about?
Yeah, the sales team are saying, "Oh, it's really, you're being into Foyles." That's brilliant.
Well, one of the things with a good soldier, a good man, was Ford Madox Ford a good man? In some respects, he was. He was very generous to other writers. As that description we read earlier said, he loved books, he loved reading. Alex, he would have been an excellent guest on this podcast. But he was also something of a roue at best. And of course, famously, he both discovered our great heroine, Jean Rhys, and lived in a ménage à trois with her and with his partner, Stella Bowen. And when that came to a disastrous close, Madox Ford, who had been the original Rhys's original publisher and champion, wrote a foreword to one of her books. She memorialised him in her novel Quartet. And I will read her description of meeting Heidler, a.k.a. Ford Madox Ford, for the first time. And you be the judge. Le Franc's is a small restaurant halfway up the boulevard du Montparnasse. It is much frequented by the Anglo-Saxons of the quarter and by a meagre sprinkling of Scandinavians and Dutch. The patron is provincial and affable. The patron, who sits beaming behind the counter, possesses a mildly robust expression and the figure and coiffure of the 90s. Her waist goes in, her hips come out. Her long black hair is coiled into a smooth bun on the top of her round head. She is very restful to the tired eye. The Heidlers were sitting at a table at the end of the room. "Good evening," said Mrs. Heidler in the voice of a well-educated young male. Her expression was non-committal. "Encore deux vermouth cassis," said Mr. Heidler to the waitress. They were fresh, sturdy people. Mr. Heidler, indeed, was so very sturdy that it was difficult to imagine him suffering from a nervous breakdown of any kind whatever. He looked as if nothing could break him down. He was a tall, fair man of perhaps 45. His shoulders were tremendous, his nose arrogant, his hands short, broad, and so plump that the knuckles were dimpled. The wooden expression of his face was carefully striven for. The eyes were light blue and intelligent, but with a curious underlying expression of obtuseness, even of brutality. "I bet that man is a bit of a brute sometimes," thought Maria. And as she thought it, she felt his hand lying heavily on her knee. He looked kind, peaceful, and exceedingly healthy. His light, calm eyes searched the faces of the people passing on the boulevard Montparnasse, and his huge hand lay possessively, heavy as lead, on her knee. Ridiculous sort of thing to do. Ridiculous, not frightening. Why frightening? She made a cautious but decided movement, and the hand was withdrawn. "It's very cold here," said Heidler in his gentle voice. "Let's go to the select bar, shall we?" Doesn't he seem nice? What a nice man. What a nice man. So we have this constant enigma in the enigma of, you know, John, touch of evil.
Yeah.
He was some kind of a man. What does it matter what you say about people?
Yeah. I love the idea of it being a self-portrait. That really is gelling with me. Well, now you've said that.
Yeah. How can he know? How can he know the ins and outs of equivocation in the way that the narrator does, unless he himself has privileged access to those ways of thinking?
Yeah. It's almost like Patricia Highsmith kind of wrote him.
Well,
in a way.
You are a fan. You are a Highsmith admirer, aren't you? You said that.
I don't want to get you started on the TV series.
Of what? What, of Ripley?
Yeah.
With that guy in it. Yeah. Do you see a similarity between Ford Madox Ford and Highsmith then? At least in The Good Soldier.
At least in The Good Soldier, yeah. I don't know enough of his work really other than this book. I see more of James in him, or the other way around.
Do you? Henry James?
Yeah.
John, you were going to say you feel like there's some Henry James,
but
there isn't at the same time, right?
Yeah, well, I think the interesting thing is he bridged, didn't he, that kind of the gap between Henry James and Conrad and the modernists. He was instrumental in publishing, kind of a number of modernist writers. And this book often gets taught as a sort of modernist text, which is interesting in itself because it kind of passes as realism if you're reading it in one way. But then if you start to think about it as not a realistic novel, and you start to think about Virginia Woolf and Joyce and inner monologue and misdirection, that brilliant phrase you used, Andy, then you start to see that there's maybe a lot more going on than this than just telling this supposedly very sad story. And I also think that the presentation of sex in the novel is pretty shocking for 1915. I mean, it's very, very direct. I just got a tiny little bit to, well, it's not tiny, but it's worth reading. This feels to me like this is so much this voice. I'm not going to read it in American because I now think he wasn't American. I now think it was Ford Madox Ford. So I should probably do it in some kind of, Bluffton Tufton kind of voice. I have come to be very much of a cynic in these matters. I mean that it is impossible to believe in the permanence of man's or woman's love, or at any rate, it is impossible to believe in the permanence of any early passion. As I see it, at least with regard to a man, a love affair, a love for any definite woman, is something in the nature of a widening of the experience. With each new woman that a man is attracted to, there appears to come a broadening of the outlook, or if you like, an acquiring of new territory. A turn of the eyebrow, a tone of the voice, a queer characteristic gesture, all these things, and it is these things that cause to arise the passion of love. All these things are like so many objects on the horizon of the landscape that tempt a man to walk beyond the horizon, to explore. He wants to get, as it were, behind those eyebrows with the peculiar turn, as if he desired to see the world with the eyes that they overshadow. He wants to hear that voice applying itself to every possible proposition, to every possible topic. He wants to see those characteristic gestures against every possible background. Of the question of the sex instinct, I know very little, and I do not think that it counts for very much in a really great passion. It can be aroused by such nothings, by an untied shoelace, by a glance of the eye in passing, that I think it might be left out of the calculation. I don't mean to say that any great passion can exist without a desire for consummation. That seems to me to be a commonplace, and to be therefore a matter needing no comment at all, except you're commenting about it. It is a thing with all its accidents that must be taken for granted. As in a novel or a biography, you take it for granted that the characters have their meals with some regularity. But the real fierceness of desire, the real heat of a passion long continued and withering up the soul of a man, is the craving for identity with the woman that he loves. He desires to see with the same eyes, to touch with the same sense of touch, to hear with the same ears, to lose his identity, to be enveloped, to be supported. For whatever may be said of the relation of the sexes, there is no man who loves a woman that does not desire to come to her for the renewal of his courage, for the cutting asunder of his difficulties, and that will be the mainspring of his desire for her. We are all so afraid. We are all so alone. We all so need from the outside the assurance of our own worthiness to exist.
Oh my God, amazing.
Pretty good.
Amazing.
This is the saddest story I have ever heard. You didn't hear it, and it isn't sad. But other than that, I'll trust you all the way. Yeah.
going back to your thing about that's a novelist writing, isn't it? That's a writer writing. You don't need that to understand. I mean, in fact, he's saying you don't need to understand what's happening between the characters. That's one of the things that makes this book so remarkable when you go back to it, I think.
Well, we have to move on now, because if we don't, we won't have time for what I'm calling the good quiz. I've got a quiz for you both.
Yay!
And the idea is, this book is called The Good Soldier, and there are all sorts of books, films, events, things called The Good Something or Other. And I'm going to ask Alex and John to name them. And Nikki, I want you to keep score, please, see how they do. I think this is pretty easy, but we'll see how we go. Alex, here's the first one. What good thing is this? After her death, Eleanor Shellstrop is welcomed to a heaven-like utopian afterlife designed and run by the so-called architect Michael, but all is not as it seems.
Now, I'm just going to be honest and say that I don't know the answer to that, but you kindly gave it to me backstage, so we can edit that little bit out. Yeah. And I'll just say The Good Place.
It is The Good Place. Amazing, ladies and gentlemen.
John, reviewing the best restaurants, pubs and cafes in Great Britain since 1951. This popular gazetteer will no longer be published annually in print, but instead will henceforth be available as an app.
It's got to be The Good Food Guide.
It is The Good Food Guide.
No.
It
was just the first one, because I knew I wouldn't know any of the answers.
And I knew John would know the restaurants one, so that was fun. Alex.
Oh, God.
Alex, a 40-year-old plastics designer quits the rat race and retreats to his detached residence in Surbiton.
Yes.
Where he holds up with his wife and attempts to live a fully eco-fascist existence, rejecting everything from home comforts to modern medicine. Against their will, his neighbours become implicated in his midlife crisis.
I see you're throwing the highbrow questions at me. I think it has to be The Good Life.
Hey!
John, a UK-based political non-profit company which states its mission is to achieve change through legal means, whose founder's first book, Bringing Down Goliath, was published in 2023, and who at Christmas 2021 killed a fox with a baseball bat.
The good. It's Jolyon. What's his name? It's The Good Law Project.
The Good Law Project. You received some help, so
I did. Sorry.
Well done, though. Round of applause. Thank you. Alex, during the American Civil War, a man with no name murders a string of people for reasons which remain obscure but look fantastic.
Is it the good, the bad, and the ugly?
It is The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly.
Is that American?
It's the American Civil War.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, you wouldn't know it, would you? But it is.
No.
John, a pub in Camden, seen as being central to the Britpop scene of the 1990s, frequented by members of Blur, Menswear, Amy Winehouse, and others.
Oh, God. Wow. The Cape of Good Hope? No.
Nikki, what is it?
The Good Mixer.
It is The Good Mixer.
Yes.
Bad luck. Right, Alex. Mm-hmm. Which best-selling British novel, following the fortunes of a touring music hall party, was first published in 1929, won the James Tate Black Memorial Prize, has been adapted for the stage on 4 separate occasions, for cinema twice, for a television series in 1980, and has featured, amongst others, Ronald Harwood, Andre Previn, Alan Plater, James Judi Dench, and Sir John Gielgud.
Wow, I don't know, but I want to see that. That sounds
It is
great.
one of the most... It's such a perfect backlisted book because it was so famous for 50 years and now is probably entirely forgotten. Do you know?
No, I've got no
Does anyone
idea.
know? It is The Good Companions by J.B. Priestley.
Priestley.
Point for the audience. Thank you very much.
Oh, wow.
Finally, John. This is a short excerpt from an American novel which won the National Book Award in 1964. Please name novel and author. The good die young, but I have been spared to build myself up so that I may end my life as good as gold. The senior dead will be proud of me. I will join the YMCA of the immortals.
No. Go on.
Anyone? Not good as gold. Anyone else? Disappointing. Come on, backlisted listeners. It's Herzog by Saul Bellow. Oh, yeah,
it's going to say Bellow.
So who won that? Alex did.
Yeah, Alex won.
Alex, is there anything that we didn't talk about or anything we didn't get to say about The Good Soldier? Obviously, there's loads because it's such a rich, multifaceted novel. Is there anything in particular that you would like to say to the audience about if they haven't read it? Why should they read it?
Because every time you read it, it's a different book. And it is, like, use the word kaleidoscopic. It's, it's labyrinthine. It's just, it's haunted me all of these years. And I think, like I said to you on email, it's like a magic trick. And no matter how many times I study it to try and work out how he did it, I still can't. So it's perfect, I think.
How rare it is that a book is a shapeshifter like this. I mean, I can't think of a book that quite matches it for that ability to change. And you can see its influence everywhere. We were talking about, you can't imagine, it's Julian Barnes's favourite novel. You can hear it in Sense of an Ending. It's one of Ishiguro's favourite novels. You can feel it, that voice in Remains of the Day feels like it's kind of coming out of the same place.
Kate Summerscale as well. It's a great favourite of hers, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so I'm going to ask each of you in turn as our final question. Is it deliberate? Is it this good deliberately?
You go first.
I think it has to be. I think, maybe it's more convincing, as you said, like a self-portrait. Then it kind of makes sense. A self-portrait of a man who is himself unreadable, unknowable, even to himself, perhaps.
Yeah. I like that idea very much. I like the idea. I mean, I do like the idea that the narrator is a murderer, and by extension, if it's a self-portrait, so is Ford Madox Ford. Patricia Cornwell can do something good with that.
I was about to say, it's all very Sickert, all of this, isn't it? Yeah, particularly the different identities and things.
But I love the idea that, interestingly, the thing that appealed to me when I read it in the 1980s and when I read it again this time is how brilliantly it represents the elusiveness of truth in writing. A writer can only pretend that they are offering you the truth, because the truth is not so simple a thing that it can be represented by one person's account. And for me, the strength of the novel, regardless of whether you think the narrator is an idiot or a dissembler or a murderer or whatever, the genius of the novel is to show you repeatedly that there's only not even one version can be one version. Not one narrator cannot offer you one unambiguous take on a series of events.
I think that's absolutely right. I think that, going back to that intention question, I think he intended it to be very good. I think he intended it to be the best book he could write. And it's curious to me that it was the one of all his books that was his favourite, and it is the one, with the exception of the Parade's End series, that still gets read. But it is, I think, what you've just said is exactly the point, is that even if he intended it, he didn't intend, he can't control how much of himself is or isn't in that book. No writer can. The act of writing a book transforms the material.
Well, I've got a surprise for you, John.
He's here
tonight.
You know nothing of my work. How you get to stand on a stage and talk about it is a mystery to me.
Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. And a special thanks, Alex Michaelides, for kicking off this residency at Foyles. We hope to be back here in a month to talk about Gawain and the Green Knight with members of the Backlisted family. We hope we'll see you again for that. Nikki says tickets are available.
June the 12th,
they are.
Wednesday.
So thanks very much. Alex, thank you so much. John Mitchell, thank you so much. Nikki
Andy
Birch,
Miller.
thank you so much.
Nicky
Tess,
Birch.
thank you so much. And thank you to our lovely audience for coming. Good night, everybody. Thank you.